Chapter 2: Progressive Revelation. The brutal fact about the current state of affairs on planet Earth is that human beings have accepted so many lies, so many erroneous concepts, so many unbelievable ideas that even I, Jesus, find it difficult to know where to begin. You have grown up in a culture that is so permeated by erroneous concepts that one might say that your mind is encaged in a labyrinth. The labyrinth has many blind alleys, and it has only one way that leads to the center of being. I clearly see that human beings are entrapped in a jungle of lies. I also know the truth and reality of God. The problem is that in trying to impart the truth to you, I must begin at your present level of consciousness. I cannot possibly give you truth in its purest form because in your present state of consciousness, your imagination simply cannot cope with that truth. Likewise, your free will cannot accept a truth that is so different from the lies and errors that you have come to accept that you have incorporated into the very fabric of your being, your sense of identity. Please take a look at the Bible. Please recognize that the law of Moses was given to a group of people who were trapped in a very low state of consciousness. That is why this is a set of commandments saying, do this and do that. It was given to spiritual children who needed a very simple set of rules. It was aimed at changing their outer actions. Now compare the law of Moses to the higher law that I brought forth in the Sermon on the Mount and other teachings. For example, I said that it is not enough to abstain from the outer act of adultery. You must overcome the state of consciousness that makes you desire to commit adultery. In other words, it is not enough that you do not commit an outer act that is wrong. You must rise above the state of consciousness in which you desire to commit such an act. My teachings attempted to transform people's state of consciousness. For anyone with an open mind, it should be easy to see that the teachings I gave 2,000 years ago represented a progression compared to the law of Moses. The reason for this progression is that between the time of Moses and my appearance in Israel, humankind had progressed. Humankind had risen to a higher state of consciousness, and therefore people were now ready to receive a higher understanding and a higher teaching, even a higher law. My teachings were incomplete. It is completely and utterly amazing to me that some people can seriously believe that the teachings I gave forth 2,000 years ago represent the ultimate or highest teachings that God could ever bring forth on this planet. Let me make it absolutely clear. The teachings that I gave 2,000 years ago were not the highest or ultimate teachings that God can bring forth on this planet. My teachings were nothing more than the highest teachings that could be brought forth at the time, given humankind's state of consciousness. My teachings were incomplete, and they were limited in many ways. That limitation was not due to a limitation on the part of God or on the part of His mouthpiece, meaning myself. That limitation was due to the fact that humankind was not ready to receive a higher teaching. One might say that my teachings represent a measured response to a crisis. It was not the highest possible response, it was the highest practical response. Today, humankind has progressed to a higher state of consciousness, and therefore I can now bring forth higher teachings than I did 2,000 years ago. This book is but one chapter in my teachings for this new age. Yet despite the fact that humankind has progressed, the people of today are still in a very limited state of consciousness. God is and always has been unlimited. The gap between the limited consciousness of human beings and the unlimited consciousness of God is, figuratively speaking, almost unlimited. Yet God created human beings in His own image and likeness. A human being has the capacity of consciousness to experience the fullness of God. Yet to experience that fullness, a human being must rise above the state of consciousness that is dominated by limitations, relativity, and mortality. The true meaning of the statement that you cannot serve two masters is that you cannot be in two states of consciousness at the same time. The lower consciousness, what my beloved Paul called the carnal mind, but which I prefer to call the death consciousness, simply cannot fathom the reality of God. It will never be able to fathom the reality of God. Outer knowledge is not enough. If you look at my life in Galilee, you will see that I was in constant conflict with the religious authorities of my time, namely those who represented the Orthodox Jewish religion. I repeatedly rebuked the Pharisees and Sadducees. Why did I run the risk of openly denouncing these authority figures? Because they had taken away the key of knowledge. Do not misunderstand this statement. These people were not ignorant or stupid. They were very knowledgeable in terms of the outer law of God. They knew the scriptures, and they could recite long passages from the scriptures. They had a very sophisticated intellectual understanding of the scriptures and of the outer law of God as it was known at that time. With all this outer knowledge, how could I claim that they had taken away the key of knowledge? It is a basic fact that you simply cannot know God and God's truths through outer knowledge. You can know God only through a direct inner experience whereby God reveals Himself to you. The key to receiving this experience is to reach beyond the death consciousness. You must seek union with a higher part of your being, a higher part of your mind. What do you think Paul meant when he said, "Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus"? The Orthodox people were approaching life and God from the death consciousness. They had come to believe the lie that the death consciousness was capable of understanding and experiencing the truth of God. They thought that knowing God was simply a matter of raising up and perfecting the human mind until that mind was somehow magically able to fathom the reality of God. My beloved hearts, please make a sincere effort to understand that this is nothing but a lie and an illusion. The key of knowledge is not the perfection of the human mind. The key of knowledge is to rise above the death consciousness and unite with a higher part of your mind. The key of knowledge is to follow the admonishment of my beloved Paul. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. You must realize that Paul had never been my disciple while I was physically present on earth. Paul knew me only through a direct inner experience that started on the road to Damascus, but which was repeated on many occasions. Paul never knew me through outer knowledge. Paul never communicated with me through outer means of communication. Paul heard me speak to him only in the silence of his own heart, although I had to speak very loudly at first. I chose Paul because even though he was persecuting my followers, he was, at inner levels of his being, willing to come up higher. He was willing, in a blinding flash of recognition and honesty, to admit that he had been entrapped by erroneous beliefs. He was willing, in the blink of an eye, to completely surrender and let go of those erroneous beliefs. He was willing to admit that he had been wrong and to move on without self-condemnation. He was willing to instantly turn away from the darkness of his former ways and face the bright light of my presence. Oh, if only people would realize that my beloved Paul was not unique. He had nothing that you do not have. You too have the capacity to reach beyond the death consciousness. You too have the capacity to receive an inner revelation of truth. You too have the capacity to choose to let go of your present beliefs and to see them as unreal. You too have the capacity to admit your mistake, to ask for forgiveness, to accept God's forgiveness, and to forgive yourself. You too have the capacity to turn away from the death consciousness and to face my shining presence of love and truth. You too can be transformed by the truth that I am, the truth that I am willing to bring into your life and consciousness, if you will but open the door of your heart a little bit. If you will reach for my truth with an open heart, you too can be chosen as Paul was chosen. He was not chosen because he was somehow better than you. He was chosen because he was open to my truth. Please let me into your heart. I will be gentle. I will not require you to leave your nets of incorrect beliefs all at once. I will give you time to absorb the truth and reality that I am. Yet it is the law of God that I cannot give you forever. All things must come to an end, even your opportunity to come up higher. Take some time to absorb my teachings, but do not procrastinate forever. Work while you have the light, for the night will come when you can no longer work. Receiving true knowledge. When you look at my life, you will see that I often rebuke those who promoted a doctrine filled with dead men's bones. I did this because I knew that no doctrine could ever capture the fullness of God. To know that fullness, you must use an outer doctrine only as a ladder. Yet to truly know God, you must reach beyond the ladder itself. You must realize that although you cannot climb without the ladder itself cannot take you all the way. No earthly ladder can reach all the way into our Father's kingdom. There will always be a gap. To cross that gap and receive true knowledge of God, you must reach beyond outer knowledge. You must allow God to reveal Himself to you in the secret chamber inside your heart. You must follow outer doctrines as far as they can take you, and then you must listen to the inner voice that calls you to come up higher. That voice is my voice. My sheep know my voice, and you will hear my voice if you will but listen for it in the stillness of your heart. In today's world, many people know the inner voice as intuition. Much teaching has been given about intuition and the value of intuition. You can gain much inspiration from studying such teachings and from applying a systematic technique for increasing your intuition. Yet do not forget that the very essence of intuition is that it is a form of communication between your conscious mind and a higher part of your being. Intuition, in its highest form, is nothing less than my attempt to speak to you and give you true knowledge of our Father's kingdom. The key of knowledge is that you can gain true knowledge only through a direct, inner experience of truth. It is what the ancient Greeks and many of my disciples called gnosis. When you have gnosis, you have closed the gap between the knower and the known. You have gone beyond outer knowledge. You have allowed the truth that is written in your inward parts to shine through all layers of your consciousness until it reaches your conscious mind. You have allowed that truth to transform your consciousness so that you are no longer a mortal, but a spiritual being. As I will show you later, the key to understanding my true teachings is to understand how a spiritual being can descend into mortal form and yet acknowledge that it is a spiritual being who is the Word made flesh. Paul admonished people to not only hear the Word, but to do the Word. I now say, do not simply do the Word, be the Word.